Hey guys, so today I wanted to talk about what we talk about when we talk about realization. That was a bit of a mouthful. Um, so I grew up in San Diego, and one of my first introductions to a spiritual path was the Self-Realization Fellowship. I used to go to service there every Sunday in high school and loved it. But I didn't really understand then what realization was. Also, yoga was one of my earliest kind of pathways to spirituality. Started doing yoga when I was 13, the asana practice, and then started when I was about 16 or 17, started actually like getting into yoga as a philosophy. And the whole point of yoga, that root word yuj, I don't actually know if that's how it's pronounced, but the root word of yoga means to yoke, like an ox to a cart. The other word that they use to describe it is union. And so that realization, that union, what is it that we're talking about when we talk about that? So a lot of times you might hear people in kind of the spiritual world, but the spiritual community and who are on spiritual paths talk about how all is one and all is love and all is perfection, all is in harmony. It's all perfectly loving and God, and it's all you, and everything is working out to your highest good. And for anyone who doesn't experience that to be true, that feels deeply invalidating. The other thing that I do a lot of, which I'm going to talk about more on this channel, is, I'm a revolutionary activist. And especially in the world where you're experiencing oppression and exploitation and colonization and capitalism and patriarchy, all this talk of like it's all one and it's all in perfect harmony like feels pretty invalidating to the reality of and the legitimacy of the pain and suffering and trauma that you're experiencing. So to start harmonizing the two, we need to start with understanding what realization is and what union is, so that these kind of two conversations about an external locus of suffering and an internal locus of suffering can talk to each other. Because personally, I believe that ending suffering is not possible without both sides of the equation being at the very least, in conversation, because there is important stuff to learn from each. If you're of the opinion that the end of suffering is only political or external, then the more internally happy, conscious, and aware people are, the easier it is to practice radical politics. I think anyone who's ever been in like a non-hierarchical radical organization can attest to that people's internal, emotional, unprocessed stuff ruins everything. And likewise, if you believe that the only source of true happiness is internal and that the locus of suffering is an internal perception, not having this whole capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, racism thing to cause suffering in our lives is gonna make this all a lot easier too. They just can't hurt each other, except when they deeply invalidate each other, the political aspects and the spiritual aspects. So to start with, what realization means is making the ultimate reality that all is love and one and in harmony seem real to you. Realization, I love the word because it has this kind of both as within, so without meaning built within it. Because to realize something, the way we usually use it, means to recognize that something is so. I realized that I left my keys on the table. I came to understand that this is reality. But it also has another meaning. In French, there's the term réalisateur, which is like a director of a film, the person who realizes it, who makes it manifest in reality. So when we talk about realization, what we mean, what it is that we're yoking, creating a union between, is the ultimate reality that all is one and in perfect harmony, and my own perception of reality in which I am suffering and in pain and a victim. That's what realization is, and why it's important to both politics and spirituality is, first of all, understanding that that's what we're talking about when we talk about realization makes us able to have the conversation in a way that isn't so deeply invalidating to people who are suffering. You know how it is. If you've ever studied dialectical behavioral therapy at all, one of the first things you learn is like, validate people's experience. And what that means is understand that their experience makes perfect sense. Truly understand that. And the funny thing is, no matter who it is or what experience they're having, it makes perfect sense. That's like how experiences work. There is a cause and an effect. So if I am experiencing victimization, I'm experiencing powerlessness and trauma, and there's nothing I can do to get out of it, there's a perfectly good reason for that. That I'm probably experiencing pain, that the efforts I made to get myself out of pain haven't worked to get myself out of pain, that I'm starting to feel like there's nothing I can do to get myself out of pain, and that I look around me and see so many people with so much more of the kind of power I think would get me out of pain. Think being the operative word. And all of that is perfectly legitimate. It is not wrong to think that way. It's not woke or like limited or low vibe to think that way. Like, that's perfectly legitimate, understandable, and a completely clear way of viewing the world. Like, your landlord, who has way more power and money than you, just kicked you out onto the street with your family, and you don't have a way to put a roof over your head and get your health care. Feeling like a victim makes perfect sense. And I think anyone who calls themselves spiritual and feels the need to tell people in a situation of such obvious victimization that they're not victims and that they have the power and you manifest your own reality, what you're really saying is, I don't want to empathize with anybody else. It's easier for me to sit here and sort of blame this person for their own suffering because that makes me feel like the world is good and just, than it is for me to empathize with this person's pain and try to help them. At the same time, we do actually have the power to manifest our own reality. The question is, what kind of reality do you want to manifest? And for me, one where there's empathy, first and foremost, is kind of crucial. And one where people enact the power that they have and step into that power and don't feel like victims, is the cornerstone of that. And the fact is, even if all of this reality that I see outside my window is illusory, and is Maya and is not actually real, I still have some power to do things in it. And so when I'm trying to step into my own power, that involves stepping into my power in the streets as well as stepping into my power in my own psyche. And that I really do think that realization means as within, so without. As above, so below, which means as it seems in my own psyche, in the universe, in God, so below in the realm of us mortals. Which means if the realm of us mortals is not happy, is not harmonious, is not loving, is full of suffering and victimization and trauma and war and cruelty, then we haven't done it yet. I do think that going entirely external is impossible because you can't actually ever perceive the external world beyond your own personal perceptions. Any attempt to change the world only through changing the world as opposed to changing yourself will fail. That's sort of the point of this, understanding the ego as an addiction thing, that it's this, attempt to solve your pain through an avenue that can't solve it, to your own detriment. However, so I think that, the kind of spiritual work, or at least the emotional, psychological work, has to be a huge part of it. Like that, you can't do anything without that. I don't know if it's possible to do it without kind of liberation in the streets either, for the simple reason that I think you're lying to yourself if you're not you're not empathizing with other people. Like, the whole point of all is one is that other people are also you. And I've started to experience very recently being in kind of such a state of internal love that I can see people through their pain, like them on the other side of it. But there's nothing loving in me being like, you're better than this. You're not suffering right now. Like, that's me dividing my reality from theirs, creating this separation of ego rather than stepping into empathy and stepping into a shared reality with that person in which we can come together. We can kind of suture the wounds of separation and ego and begin to create and realize, make manifest a world of harmony and love and oneness.